My name is Sarah Connelly. I am 30 years old. And on a gray Friday morning in March, I stood in the doorway of Grace Fellowship Church in Portland, Oregon, still in my coat, still holding my car keys, reading a text message that my brother had sent 40 minutes earlier while I was already on the highway. Don't come to the funeral. 5 words. No punctuation at the end. No explanation, no follow-up message, no call. Just those 5 words, sent from my brother Daniel's phone at 8:47 in the morning, received by me at 9:23 when I stopped at a red light 20 minutes from the church. I stared at the message for a long time, long enough that the light changed twice. Then I put my phone in my bag. I pulled into the turning lane, and I drove the rest of the way to the church, because it was my father's funeral. And whatever my brother thought he was doing with those 5 words, I was not going to bury my father without being in the room. I pushed open the doors of Grace Fellowship at 9:41. The service was scheduled for 10. The church was already filling, people finding seats, speaking quietly, the particular muted choreography of a gathering that has grief as its organizing principle. I stood in the doorway, and I looked for Daniel. He found me first. He was crossing the room before I had fully registered him, moving fast, with his shoulders forward and his jaw set, and an expression on his face that I had not seen since we were children, and he was trying to talk me out of something he believed would hurt me. He reached me. He took my arm. Not roughly, firmly. The grip of someone who needs you to stay in one place. He leaned close and whispered, "You shouldn't be here. You don't know what's happening." I looked past him, and that is when I saw it. Something at that funeral that made no sense. Something sitting quietly in the 3rd pew on the left side of the aisle, wearing black, hands folded, looking forward at the closed casket at the front of the church. A woman, 60 years old, perhaps. Silver-haired, composed, the particular stillness of someone who has been preparing for this day for a long time. Beside her, 2 people, a man and a woman, both in their 30s, seated close to her with the specific proximity of children sitting beside their mother. I looked at the woman. Then I looked at the man beside her. And I understood, with a cold and total certainty that arrived all at once and without warning, why my brother had sent that text. My whole body went cold. But before I tell you what actually happened, please like and subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's begin. My father, Robert Connelly, died on a Tuesday in March at the age of 64. A heart attack, sudden, the way heart attacks are when they are the serious kind, the kind that does not give you time to make calls or say the things you meant to say. He collapsed in his kitchen on a Tuesday morning and was gone by the time the paramedics arrived. My brother Daniel, who lived 30 minutes from our father and spoke to him every few days, was the one who got the call from the neighbor who found him. Daniel called me next. I was in Portland. I had moved there 2 years earlier for work, and I drove to my father's house in Salem that afternoon. The house where Daniel and I had grown up. The house our father had lived in alone for 12 years, since our mother passed away when I was 18 and Daniel was 22. The house that smelled, when I walked in, of the particular combination of wood and old paper and the specific coffee brand our father had drunk every morning for as long as I could remember. Daniel and I sat in that kitchen for a long time that evening. We talked about our father the way you talk about someone immediately after they are gone, in the present tense still, catching yourself, correcting the tense, the correction itself being a small repeated loss. We talked about the arrangements. We talked about who needed to be called. We did not talk about whatever Daniel was keeping from me. I did not know he was keeping anything. He was quieter than usual, which I attributed to grief. He is quieter than me in ordinary circumstances. I went home to Portland on Thursday. The funeral was scheduled for Friday. I told Daniel I would be there at 9:30. He said okay. He sent the text at 8:47. Daniel's hand was still on my arm in the doorway of the church. His face was pale and doing several things at once, apologetic and frightened, and also, underneath both of those, the face of a man who has been carrying something alone and has just been relieved of the option. "How long have you known?" I asked him. He looked at me, then past me, to make sure no one near the door was within hearing. 6 weeks, he said. 6 weeks. Our father had been alive 6 weeks ago. Daniel had known something for 6 weeks and had said nothing. "Tell me," I said.
He told me.
The woman in the third pew on the left was named Margaret. My father had met her in 1989, which was the year I was born. They had been together, with periods of distance but never complete separation, for 35 years. She had 2 children. A son named Patrick, who was 31, and a daughter named Claire, who was 28. Patrick and Claire Connelly. My father's last name. Given, as Daniel had discovered when he found the documentation 6 weeks earlier, legitimately. Their birth certificates listed Robert Connelly as their father. My father had had 2 families for 35 years. I sat in the pew beside Daniel. He had steered me to a seat once he realized I was not going to leave, which I think he had known I would not do even before I walked through the door, and I looked at the back of Margaret's silver head 3 rows ahead of me, and I tried to hold what I had just been told in a way that my mind could contain. 2 families. 35 years. Our mother, who had died at 52 believing she knew the full dimensions of her life with our father. Margaret, who had raised 2 children with a man she had shared with a family she apparently knew existed, which was a fact that raised its own set of questions I was not ready to approach yet. Daniel spoke quietly beside me, filling in what he could. He had found a letter in our father's desk 6 weeks ago when he had gone to help with some household paperwork. Our father had been having some health issues and had asked Daniel to help organize certain documents, the practical preparation of a man in his 60s who has started thinking about order. The letter was from Margaret. Not recent, dated 2019. It was not, as Daniel had feared when he first saw the handwriting he didn't recognize, a love letter in the usual sense. It was the letter of 2 people with a long and complicated and deeply entangled history, discussing something practical, a decision about Patrick's legal surname, which Margaret wanted to formalize. The tone of it was the tone of people who have been navigating a difficult shared situation for many years and have developed a functional, if not simple, language for it. Daniel had confronted our father. Our father had told him everything, or what he presented as everything. Daniel said it had the quality of a partial accounting, the way confessions do when they are made under pressure rather than freely. He had confirmed Margaret. He had confirmed Patrick and Claire. He had explained, in terms that Daniel described to me in the church pew as both coherent and entirely inadequate, the architecture of the arrangement. He had been in love with Margaret before he married our mother. He had not been able to let go of that. He had not been willing to choose. He had managed the impossibility of that refusal to choose for 35 years with a compartmentalization so thorough that neither family had ever met the other. Our mother had died, without knowing. Daniel and I had grown up without knowing. Patrick and Claire had known about us. Margaret had known about our mother. The knowledge, apparently, had been asymmetrical by design. Our father had told Margaret because the alternative was logistically impossible, and had never told our mother or Daniel or me because he did not want to. Daniel had asked him, "Why didn't you just leave one of us?" Our father had said, "Because I loved both lives, and I couldn't." Daniel had sat with that for 6 weeks alone, because he did not know how to tell me, and he thought telling me before the funeral would make it impossible for me to get through the day, which was both true and ultimately not his decision to make. "I should have called you," he said. "Yes," I said. "You should have." The service began at 10. The pastor spoke. A colleague of my father's from the architecture firm where he had worked for 20 years spoke. Daniel spoke, briefly, steadily, with the composure of a man who has had 6 weeks to prepare himself for this moment and who loves our father despite everything, the way that you love people who are complicated when you have no option that does not include the complication. I did not speak. I had not prepared anything, and even if I had, the person I would have been describing 48 hours earlier was a different person than the one whose funeral I was now sitting at. I watched Margaret from 3 rows back. She sat very still through the entire service with her hands folded in her lap. Once, toward the end of the pastor's remarks, she pressed 2 fingers briefly to her mouth and then lowered them again. That was the only movement. Patrick sat beside her with his jaw set in a way I recognized. I recognized it because it is the way Daniel's jaw sets when he is managing something difficult in public. It was our father's jaw. I could see that clearly now, looking at him directly for the first time. Claire was smaller than her mother and sat with her shoulder pressed against Margaret's arm. She had our father's eyes. Dark brown, slightly downturned at the outer corners. I have the same eyes. I had simply never seen them on anyone else's face before. At the reception afterward, held in the church's fellowship hall, Daniel positioned himself between me and Margaret's family in a way I recognized as protective and that I gently redirected by walking past him. Margaret saw me coming. She stood up from her chair before I reached her. We looked at each other. I had thought, in the pew during the service, about what I would say to her when this moment came. I had run through anger and questions and cold courtesy, and all of the available options. None of them had felt adequate to what the moment actually was when I arrived at it. What I said was, "How long did you know about us?" She said, "From the beginning." I nodded. That was what I had expected. "And our mother?" I asked. "Never," she said. I asked him to tell her many times. He wouldn't. She paused. "I'm sorry that she never knew. I thought about that a great deal over the years." I looked at her for a long moment. She was a woman who had loved my father, which was something I understood. She had also been part of a configuration that had required my mother to live in unknowing, which was something I was going to need a long time to untangle. Both of those things were true simultaneously. The world, I was learning, has a very high tolerance for holding contradictory true things at the same time. The difficulty is always ours, not the world's. Patrick stood up when I glanced at him. He was uncertain. I could see the uncertainty clearly, the specific awkwardness of a person who does not know what register they are permitted to be in. I extended my hand. He shook it. "I don't know what to say," he said honestly. "Neither do I said. "But I think honesty is probably the only place to start." He nodded. He looked up close, exhausted in the way that people look when they have been holding something heavy for a long time and have been waiting for permission to set it down. I thought, we have both been lied to. In different ways and with different information withheld, but the same essential lie at the center of it. The lie of a man who could not choose and would not admit that he couldn't, and who built around his refusal two families who each believed they had more of the truth than they did. Claire watched me from her chair. I looked at her. She looked back, cautious and direct, both things at once, which reminded me of the way I look at things when I am not sure whether to trust them. She had our father's eyes. I nodded at her. She nodded back. That was all for that day. It was enough for that day. I drove home to Portland on Friday evening. I drove in silence with no music and no podcasts, just the road and the dark and my own thoughts, which needed the space. I have been in contact with Daniel every day since. We are working through it together, the way we have worked through hard things since we were children, imperfectly and with significant disagreement about certain questions, and with the underlying certainty that we are in it together regardless. I have spoken to Patrick twice on the phone. Brief calls, careful, the tentative contact of people who share something significant and are not yet sure what to build from it. We have agreed to take it slowly. We have agreed that neither of us is responsible for what was done, and that what we build from here, if we build anything, is ours to decide. I have not yet spoken to Claire beyond that nod in the fellowship hall. I am not rushing. She is not rushing. Some things need time before they need words. And Margaret. I have not spoken to her again since the reception. I do not know yet what I think or feel about her fully enough to know what a conversation should be. That territory requires more time and more honesty than I am currently able to bring to it without letting anger drive. I am trying not to let anger drive. What I know is this. My brother sent me 5 words to keep me away from a truth he thought I could not handle. He was wrong about that, not because I handled it easily, but because I was owed the truth regardless of the difficulty. Truth is not something that should be rationed according to how well we think a person can absorb it. I walked through those doors because it was my father's funeral, and I was going to be there. What I found inside was not what I expected, and will take me years to fully understand. But I was there, and knowing, even when knowing is hard, is always better than the door staying closed. Always.